The Politico story, how do bad cops stay in power? Just look at Miami. Quote, this is my neighborhood and I run this shit the way I want to. Police Captain Javier Ortiz allegedly told a man who wanted to file an internal affairs complaint against him.
Yeah, Javier Ortiz is Miami's worst cop. He's Miami's most corrupt cop. And over 17 years, he's accumulated something like 49 citizen complaints, which is 2.5 times the number of complaints than all the other commanders in the city of Miami department combined. When you get promoted, you're supposed to have less dealings with kind of people at the beat level, on the street level. But this guy inserts himself into situations where he can abuse his authority and put his hands on people. And interestingly, the majority of them are African-American. And in fact, the FBI and the FDLE did an investigation into this guy and found that he absolutely has a bias and an abuse problem specifically towards African Americans, who only are something like 16 or 17% of the city that he's supposed to be policing, yet they make up nearly 40% of the citizens that he has these interactions with, including Jonathan Vilma, who was pulled over, held at gunpoint. This is for a reckless driving citation, dragged out of his car by Javier Ortiz with a gun pointed to his head, and falsely arrested by this guy. Okay, Vilma talked for the first time to Mark Caputo in this Politico article, and I nearly cried reading this shit. Robbie Anderson. How many cops you know have abused and falsely arrested 2 NFL players, or one, let alone 2? Robbie Anderson at Rolling Loud abused and falsely arrested him. I say falsely because the charges were dropped against both Anderson and Vilma once the state attorney's office looked at the totality of this situation and realized who they were dealing with, which is Javier Ortiz. And the state attorney's office knows because they have had nearly a dozen opportunities, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, to take this guy off the streets. And when I say take this guy off the streets, I mean charge him criminally for, at a bare minimum, lying in a report, which he does with impunity.
But she doesn't charge cops.
She doesn't charge cops. And in fact, here's the crazy thing. Here's what they do. Not a lot of people know this because you have to talk to criminal defense attorneys who deal with the state attorney's office in Miami-Dade, and they don't like to talk publicly because they obviously have a professional relationship with the state attorney's office. But here's what they do. You can go in, you have a client who was falsely arrested and whose civil rights were violated by a police officer like Javier Ortiz, okay? Took one guy whose wife, a tourist from, I think, New Jersey. The guy was going into the Ultra Music Festival, and his girlfriend had a glow stick, and you're not allowed to bring a glow stick in. Javier Ortiz and a couple other cops beat this guy and tasered him on video and then lied in a report about it. And the state attorney's office saw this and realized that they could charge him for a litany of shitting, again, at the bare minimum, lying in a report, which he just did for the first time with those police officers in Miami Beach, who beat up and falsely arrested that guy for recording them with a camera just a couple weeks ago at a South Beach hotel. And this is what they do. They basically bring in the attorney and the client. They say, listen, we know this is bullshit. We know these charges against you are false. We know you were abused. Here's what we'll do. If you agree to not pursue a complaint or litigation against these corrupt cops, we'll drop the charges against you. It's fucking evil. It's nefarious because not only are they abdicating their responsibility to follow the facts and the evidence and the law and failing to get these bad cops off the streets, they're literally protecting them and covering up for them. Okay? The problem here is not, listen, bad cops are going to be bad cops. Okay? They're going to act a fool. Okay, but this guy was the union president for 18 of his 17 years. So this guy knows the contract. He knows the LEOBOR, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which is a ridiculous law in the state of Florida that does not protect the rights of citizens, but protects the employment rights, labor rights of bad cops. Let's be honest. Not good cops, but bad cops. Okay, so bad cops are going to bad cop, right? We know that. The problem is, what has leadership done about it? Internal Affairs in the city of Miami, and Chief Acevedo, before he was fired, pointed this out, that there are issues at the command level. That includes Ortiz and that includes Internal Affairs, who have covered up for Javier Ortiz for 17 years. What do? Part of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights says that investigations into officers, number one, they get all the evidence in advance, which means they know who the witnesses are and they can tailor their version of the events. No other citizen gets this right, but they can tailor their version of the events before they ever make a statement. on the record to what the evidence says, and they know how to navigate that system. The second thing is that they can only, it also enables him to intimidate, to dox, to harass, and cyberstalk, which he has. It's well documented. Some of the people who make complaints against him, the quote that you just read, threatening people basically like, ain't shit gonna happen, and he knows that, and he's right. But the last thing is they only have 180 days to investigate. And if there's no finding, then it just disappears. So what IA, Internal Affairs, has done in the city of Miami, he's got buddies who just drag the shit out until it literally just it goes away, like into the ether, like it never happened. And this guy is a master of this. This is a guy who has been promoted through the rank. Instead of arrested and charged, he's been promoted through the ranks because Francis Suarez, who's got his arm around him, that's like I Love Lucy with the two of them. It's I Love Javi with Francis and Javier. While this guy is beating people up at Ultra, Francis is complimenting him for a job well done at Ultra. While this guy is beating people up and falsely arresting them, the state attorney isn't doing a damn thing about it. And what he did was, not once but twice, when he was looking to get recruited, he lied on his exams. On his sergeant's exam and I think his commander exam, he lied that he was African-American, that he was black. In his initial, when he applied to the police department almost 20 years ago, he was Hispanic, white Hispanic. And now all of a sudden he twice lied and said he was black and got promoted twice. And he went to a city commission meeting where he confronted commissioners and said, I am African-American, I am black, using this crazy racist one-drop rule. And the commissioners, needless to say, were incredulous. He is now suspended for, I think, the third time. Okay. For the third time, he is suspended by the new interim police chief, Manny Morales, who was taken over for the recently fired Art Acevedo. Manny Morales is a good guy, but there's a problem here with this. From the dais over the last several weeks is Joe Carollo, who, I say runs the fucking city. Joe Carollo has talked about a handful of cops. Obviously, he talks shit endlessly about Art Acevedo. He defended a cop by the name of Camacho, who Art Acevedo suspended. He defended the Papiers, who were two high-level, well-liked, longtime Miami police couple, a husband and wife, who lied and tried to cover up a car accident that she was in, nearly hitting and killing two people in downtown Miami. He defended them, and then he talked major trash about Javier Ortiz. And what I mean to say is that Joe Carollo, over the last several weeks, has been talking from the dais that he basically wants Camacho and the Papiers reinstated or rehired, and he wants Javier Ortiz gone. And what is the first act of the interim chief but to do the bidding of Joe Carollo? Now, I know Javier Ortiz is a bad cop. He shouldn't be on the force. He should have been fired a long time ago. What's funny about it is he got suspended not for what he's done to citizens, but for actually victimizing other police officers on the force, which is pretty funny. That's what he's been suspended for. But you can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And I think it's pretty disturbing when one commissioner who was elected by a margin of 230 in one district, gets to decide who in the city government gets hired and fired.
I've got a couple of other questions here, but this is an important time, and we wanted to do this weekly, at least in part, because the elections are November 2nd. I have early voted. These are small elections. These are not big things, but there's a lot of power changing hands. And a number of things I want to ask you, including what's going on in Miami Beach and why people listening to us in Miami Beach need to vote no on the 2 a.m. referendum here, because crime is getting worse and worse right around here, the Clevelander Hotel. Another shooting earlier this week on 13th and Washington. It's getting to be a bad area where you're regularly having shootings all of a sudden, which isn't the norm around here. And then you had a fiasco of a press conference when these real estate hustling power brokers I guess, did they underestimate the number of people who see through their grift and would be behind them yelling and screaming protest at what they're trying to do, which is basically ruin the Art Deco South Florida, this strip of land, our most precious, and turning it into something cheapened with their greed?
First things first, there's a public safety issue. There's a policing issue. But who do our politicians call about a public safety issue? They call developers. They call who they always call. They didn't call police experts. They didn't call public safety experts. They called developers. And they got involved in that secret meeting that we talked about last week, that shady meeting with developers, not even the developers on Ocean Drive, but outside developers, the vast majority of them not even in the state, who want to basically blight this area and buy it for pennies on the dollar.
Actively. So people who haven't heard the accusation Billy's making and the reason he thinks it's important to vote no, and we'll go through some of these other local elections as well and where it's important to vote, is because this is as plainly stated as it can be. Greed and real estate hustles that have existed throughout South Florida, power brokers are using it to actively try and turn our most precious strip of tourist land anywhere in South Florida into something that is so violent and dangerous that it can become cheaper so they can then ruin what history is here. Anything
Absolutely.
I'm missing?
Absolutely. And what's really frightening is that you have Mayor Dan Gelber, duly elected, Mayor Magoo, as I call him, because he doesn't know what to do. The city manager appointed, city manager Alina Hudak, are ceding power to Jeffrey Epstein's buddy, Philip Levine, the former mayor who nobody elected now, nobody likes, who had 4 years and in fact formed a Ocean Drive task force, 4 years to clean up this mess, only made it worse because his interest is not cleaning it up and making it safer, but intentionally blighting it because he's a real estate
Also
hustler.
the person who created new flooding ordinances in South Florida or South Beach to protect his properties.
Yeah, spent hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money to make these anti-flooding pumps that pump pollution into our water to protect where he owns real estate and to increase the value of his own real estate. This is not a good guy. And this guy put together this phony baloney pack with Christian Olvert. And this guy is a classic Democratic political grifter. I mean, he's the reason why Democrats are losing ground in Miami-Dade and statewide, is because they need to shed dead weight like Christian Olvert. But Olvert is the political operative for Phil Levine, who created these phony baloney organizations and started lying to the people. They sent out a text message. You get these campaign texts sometimes if you're on a mailing list. And he sent out a text that the Miami Beach Fraternal Order of Police, the president, says vote yes on the 2 a.m. ban. The next day, the Miami Beach FOP president puts out a press release saying, we are neutral. We have, in fact, not taken a position on this. And I think privately they've said, we don't actually believe this is really going to help anything, because the money generated on this street actually helps to fund the police, and it helps to keep property taxes comparatively lower than they could be with the hundreds of millions of dollars generated just on these 15 blocks. So they lied about the Miami Beach Fraternal Order of Police. Then they sent out a mailer that said all Miami Beach mayors, that's Philip Levine, former mayor, Maddie Bauer, former mayor, and current mayor and puppet of Jeffrey Epstein's buddy Phil Levine, say vote yes on 2 a.m. Maddie Bauer sees it and goes, what the hell is this? And puts out a video the next day saying, I'm a vote no on this. So they don't even have facts on their side. They have nobody supporting them. They're full of lies. And to your point, yes, dramatically overestimated the power and the support that they think they have. They had this ridiculous press conference to, quote, set the record straight after audio leaked of that secret developer call that the current mayor Gelber, former mayor Phil Levine, and the city manager Alina Hudak had with out-of-state developers to figure out how to intentionally blight the street and take it over and destroy Ocean Drive, the economic engine of the entertainment district and of Miami Beach. And so they got shouted down by this giant group of protesters.
There was a lot of people in a city known for apathy, a lot of people shouting. So you cannot, whatever they wanted to achieve in that press conference, you could not hear them because people were shouting them down.
And these mayors said some crazy shit, Dan. Gelber said something like, look at these people. These are not the people we want in Miami Beach. Why, Dan? Because they're black? Because they're brown? Because they're working class? Because they're literally out there screaming and fighting and clawing for their livelihoods? Dan Gelber, Philip Levine, Christian Olvert, Alina Hudak, they're literally taking food from the mouths of these people's children, okay? And they're out there insulting them that we don't want their kind here on Miami Beach. I mean, it sounds like Fidel Castro during the Mariel boat lift. Escoria, we don't want them. We don't need to flush the toilet of Miami Beach. What the hell are they talking about? And Phil Levine, the hubris of this guy, a guy who in Jeffrey Epstein's little black book had 13 listings for Phil Levine. His personal cell, his home number, his home address, his work address, all of his work and personal emails, his chauffeur's number, his driver's number, his housekeeper's number, his assistant's number, creepy shit. And Phil Levine said probably, I met him probably, and probably gave him probably, there was a lot of probablys doing a lot of work in the sentence he gave to Julie Brown about this, where he says he has no idea how this happened, and Jeffrey Epstein came to have all of his numbers in his little black book. But this guy says, screaming, barely heard over the crowd, he says, if we lose on 2 a.m., we'll come back and go for midnight. We'll ban booze at midnight. And you have to remember that they're not targeting, we already talked about this. He said this, Dan Gelber said this overtly. We're not targeting the big hotels. The billionaires and the millionaires can have their fun. The party will go on. We're just trying to shut down these small businesses here in the entertainment district. They've shown their true colors. People can see it. Vote no.
Before we get into what you're recommending, because there's a lot I want to get to here, anything in the Political article, I encourage you to read it if you have not. How do bad cops stay in power? Just look at Miami. You've done a lot of reporting and research around this. There were things missing here, right? There's reporting that you've discovered that wasn't in here.
Yeah, Mark Caputo did an outstanding job. It's like an 8,000-word piece. Every single word is worthwhile. It can't cover everything, obviously. And one of the things he mentioned is that Javier Ortiz has cost the city over $600,000 in legal settlements over his abuse of innocent people on the streets.
The dirtiest cop in the history of Miami, still presently technically employed while suspended.
He is currently on a paid vacation. That's right. He is on paid leave right now, pending this investigation, which could go on. He was previously reinstated in March after 1 year on paid vacation. And so this is, again, the third time I think that he's been suspended his career. The first time was because a woman that he had harassed and doxxed on the internet, which is a law that he broke, that Kathy Fernandez-Rundle, state law, did not prosecute him on. He was suspended because she got a restraining order briefly against him. So this guy couldn't be out on the streets as a police officer because this woman rightfully got a restraining order for a brief time against him. So he was taken off the streets then as well. So hopefully the third time's a charm, who knows? But the bottom line is the over $600,000 in legal settlements for his abuse lawsuits doesn't tell the whole story, because what happens is the city is obliged to hire Javier Ortiz at taxpayer expense, an outside attorney, to defend him in these lawsuits for abuse. And the city has spent over $400,000. When I say the city, I mean the taxpayers of Miami, one of the poorest cities in the United States. I think median income, of a single person is like $30,000. They have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on top of the $600,000+ in legal settlements to basically, this cop goes out and abuses people on the street. Then those people have to pay with their taxpayer dollars for this guy's attorneys. And then they have to pay legal settlements, in part negotiated by these attorneys that they're paying for, to the victims of this guy. And this is part of the problem. This is why the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights needs to be changed, because imagine if these police officers had to pay for their own attorney's fees. That might change things up. If liability went to the individual when you abuse people's rights and you violate your oath of office and you violate the law and you violate the rules and regulations of the department, that you are on the hook for it. But no, the taxpayers are on the hook. That's the thing. They're playing with the house's money. They're just dealers. They don't give a shit whether you win or lose.
Before we go any further, Billy, I want you to tell people how you think they should be voting. I find that your ballot, wherever it's cast, is usually very informed. I know you were really down on the Miami Herald, as was I. I don't love some of what happens with politics in Miami, and my beloved newspaper and the editorializing it does sometimes is sad. And so you were mortified by some of the endorsements that the Herald made, because you know how powerful those endorsements are. Some people count on the newspaper to be informed for them, and you objected to what the Herald did this week.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, it's a partial mea culpa. A couple of weeks ago, you took the Herald to task, rightfully so. I kind of defended them in saying that the editorial board in particular has been, which was literally atrocious just a short year and a half ago, has been new and improved. And they basically squandered that goodwill and all the hard work that the editorial board, their columnists in the newsroom have been doing to document the meltdown of the city of Miami government that we've all witnessed and you and I have covered ad nauseum the last several weeks. and the specific failures of leadership of Francis Suarez. They could have said no recommendation. They could have said protest vote, Max Martinez. But no, they basically did one of their patented Nancy Ancrum bullshit, incompetent, ethics-free. Here's all the reasons not to vote for him, but recommended with reservations, and we hope he doesn't screw up any worse than he already has. I mean, not only have they failed in their primary function, as you alluded to, which is to be the institutional memory of a city with a transient population, but they have failed to provide the necessary leadership that we require at a time when, as you said, we expect them to be better informed than the general population, especially in an off year when people are not necessarily paying attention to politics and the elections. And what they've done in District 3 is somehow even more atrocious.
Well, I'll get to District 3 with you. It's also District 5 that you wanted to talk about. But just real quick, how much information can you give people? When you came in here today, you were arguing with the Miami Herald. You were on your phone arguing. What's the information that can be given to the public on that? Because you're providing an important public service, and the Herald needs to be a watchdog, even in a weakened condition for what feels like kind of unprecedented, apocalyptic lack of decent leadership in this county and country, and in this county and area.
This is exactly the problem. The conversations I'm having with the Herald, particularly within the editorial board, are basically arguments for old-timey journalism. They sound like the dinosaurs cursing the meteor as it hurtles toward the earth. Instead of acknowledging the new world and the new reality, the fact that we have a party, a major political party in this country who is anti-democratic and pro-autocratic, the fact that we've had a character like that, Joe Carollo, for 40 years in this community, and they have done very little to help in that regard, evidenced by the fact that he is elected and will probably be reelected in no small part because of the incompetence and systemic failure of the editorial board at the Miami Herald in this week's paper. But they are making arguments that, we want to initiate discussion in the community and debate, and look, we're debating, right? I'm like, where are you? Where have you been the last 5 fucking years? Like this experiment in democracy in this republic is falling apart before our eyes. And there is a plurality of a majority of a major political party in this country who's cool with that, who supports autocracy, who's literally anti-democratic, okay? Anti-facts, anti-science. We're in this sort of post-fact, post-literate world, and they want to have these old-timey newspaper conversations. When no, you have to game these things out a little bit further in terms of your influence, in terms of in District 3, I'm supporting Quinn Smith against Joe Carollo. For people who are not part of the very influential voting bloc in Little Havana, who is pro-racist, pro-demagogue, and pro-wife beater, Joe Carollo is all those things, and pro-anti-Semite. That plays really well in certain pockets of District 3. But there are a lot of people who do not believe in that. I hope they'll show up. I think turnout is like about 5% right now in early voting in this county, which is pathetic in an election of this much consequence, particularly in the city of Miami.
For those who don't understand, just if you haven't been listening to everything that Billy's been doing here, one of the things that the alarms are going off around the way the system is broken. You are talking about a man who has been corrupt across 4 decades with an unreasonable power to control Miami's police force, to threaten Miami's businesses. He is elected and reelected again and again from a small place where not many people are voting, and he wins by a few hundred votes because most people aren't showing up. And the Carollo name has been known in Miami for 40 years, and there's been so much election fraud in this city that you don't even know how often or where people are, if they're alive, if they're real, or anything else.
Or if they filled out their own ballots.
So basically what we've been doing and doing this hour for a few months before a very important election is to see if we can reach a few hundred people in this small area that I'm guessing probably doesn't have a whole lot of our listeners or a whole lot of people necessarily that listen to English language radio, for example.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? I'm supporting Quinn Smith in District 3. He has gotten a litany, a boatload of endorsements from major organizations all across the county of Dade and the city of Miami. Miami Herald knows that. And just days ago, they went ahead and endorsed Adriana Oliva, who I have nothing against. I'm not anti-Oliva. But what that has done effectively, the only real recommendation she's gotten, this is a name that I have not heard. Quinn Smith has been running as the second place, if you will. The only hope that I think District 3 had at a runoff with Carollo. This is theoretically a primary, and if Carollo doesn't get a majority of the votes, the top two vote getters in this election will advance to a runoff. And the Herald is basically now not only abdicating the responsibility as our institutional memory and not reminding people who Carollo is and was and always will be, but they are actually doing proactive harm to this community by effectively dividing the vote. And I would say, as we sit here today, virtually guaranteeing that Carollo will win re-election on the first ballot. And in the same op-ed where they endorse Oliva over Quinn Smith, who everybody else has endorsed. Again, nothing against Miss Oliva, but you can kind of see the way the winds have been blowing. But the analysis in some of these recommendations is really accurate and effective. They basically acknowledge that Joe Carollo is running the city and not the mayor that they also recommended despite his failures of leadership. But Joe Carollo is running the city, and if he gets reelected, he could very well run the city into the ground. They say that, and they're right. And yet they make a recommendation that can conceivably guarantee his reelection and run the city into the ground. So why is the Herald pro running the city into the ground is absolutely beyond me. It's time to burn down the editorial board. The fixes that they have made were improvements, but they have failed to shore up this sinking ship. They need to either get rid of the editorial board and reallocate those resources, because the editorial board's expensive. They need to reallocate those resources into the newsroom, who's been doing pretty good work despite being utterly obliterated, okay, by cuts and resignations and layoffs. But reallocate that money to the newsroom so the newsroom can have more help. Or at the very least, they need to stop making these recommendations. They claim they're not politicians and they're not into politics. Then they get out of politics then. Okay, because you're no good at it and you're not helping. And in fact, you are exacerbating the corruption and ineptitude and bad government.
Reiterate again. So District 3, you say make
City of
sure
Miami.
to vote for.
City of Miami, vote for Quinn Smith.
District 5.
Vote for Michael Hepburn. This is a young guy born on the streets of Miami, family from the islands. So he's second generation immigrant, but born and raised in the county of Dade, in that district. In fact, I believe he was born in District 5. And he's just an inspiring figure. He's the kind of guy that we should be getting behind. You know, when I say after Tomas Regalado and Xavier Suarez and Seymour Gelber, when I say we need a new generation of leadership, I didn't mean Raquel Regalado and Francis Suarez and Dan Gelber. I didn't mean their offspring, okay, or their spouses or their siblings like Frank Carollo. It's like, no, we need some new last names. We need some new blood, not a new generation of the same old shit. Because that's the problem. We have 21st century problems and we have 20th century leaders. Miami has all the 21st century problems. You name them. They are either here first or getting worse here first, and we need to do something about them. And instead, we have these guys who are not only stuck in their mentalities in the 20th century, but they're the same fucking people, or the same names or last names from literally the last century. And we need to turn the page, and we need somebody like Michael Hepburn to come in and bring some dignity and some class and some respect to City of Miami government in District 5.
Forgive me because I don't know if this is item 282 or 283. I'm doing that off the top of my head. But vote no on the 2 a.m.
In Miami Beach, in the city of Miami Beach. Yeah, we have to distinguish, because it won't be on everybody's ballot that's listening. Yeah.
No, correct. In the city of Miami Beach, only for the people listening in Miami Beach. And if you don't want the scam run of real estate developers blighting this area, for their own profit.
And any dead people listening as well, they can vote as well.
What else do people need
Because
to
Miami.
know before we get you out of here on the upcoming election? Because this is an important week and early voting is now available to you.
Yeah, people are voting right now as we speak, but well before Election Day next week. And listen, there's just some referendums on these ballots in various cities that people are confused by, and no one can possibly, even I do the analysis on all these issues in all of these municipalities and all of these races. But I would say for people who are voting in the city of Miami Beach, obviously vote no on 2. For mayor, vote for Jean Marie Echemendia in the city of Miami Beach. In the city of Miami Beach, I think there's an item about the lease, right, at South Point Park.
At Smith & Walensky.
Vote yes to renew that lease for, I think, about 20 years. Listen, good tenants are hard to find, especially when the government's your landlord. A lot of people take advantage. A lot of people manipulate the system. A lot of people don't pay their rent. A lot of people try to screw the taxpayers. I think Smith & Walensky have been, by and large, really good tenants, and I think they should continue to be there rather than letting the city try to come up with another crooked deal for a new tenant. Same thing on the city of Miami side. There's also a referendum item on the Virginia Key Marina and whether or not to renew a lease with a group that I think has had that lease and run that property, Whiskey Joe's and Rusty Pelican and the marina there for like generations now. And I think we should vote yes and renew their lease. There's been issues through the decades. But they've been, by and large, good actors. The city is kind of down on them, which is actually a good thing, which means that they'll negotiate the new lease hard and they'll hold them accountable for it. And they'll put up the $100+ million that they have committed and shown evidence that they are sufficiently solvent to invest into that property, which is the benefit of all the taxpayers and the people who use it. So vote yes to negotiate and renegotiate the lease in the city of Miami and Virginia Key Marina.
It's an important time, so get them out on this note because we don't have a lot of time left. What else do they need to know during this week? Anything important that you need to give people informationally before they vote?
I think in terms of voting for incumbents, with the exception of the lease renewals, they're incumbents, incumbent tenants. But I think people need to know, I'll give you an update in the city of Miami. We haven't talked about this in some weeks. I can tell you right now that there are multiple people with intimate knowledge of the city of Miami and its inner workings who are and have been cooperating directly through interviews, through documents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in an active investigation into the corruption in the city of Miami. And if you think that anyone who's currently in this government, whether it's Jeffrey Watson who's running, whether it's Joe Carollo who's running, whether it's Francis Suarez who's running, you need to vote for Max Martinez for mayor. Francis is going to win. He's going to win big, but give him less of a mandate. You know, I know it's a protest vote. I know it sounds foolish, but it's the only way to kind of bring him down a rung or two and realize he needs to start paying more attention to the people of Miami and not the people of New York and Silicon Valley.
Thank you, Billy. We'll talk to you next week.
Go Canes.
Sounded like you said cocaine.